The morning he discovered his Christmas trees were gone, silence felt louder than shouting. By sunset, the entire neighborhood would learn a truth no one expected: Evan had owned land most people drove past without a second thought. Acres of tall pine trees stretched behind the quiet HOA community, dusted with winter frost, standing like patient witnesses to time. Every December, he sold a few trees legally through permits, always respectful of rules. This year felt no different until his phone started buzzing nonstop. Neighbors were asking why the HOA was selling trees directly from his land. Confused, Evan drove to the edge of his property and saw signs posted everywhere. Community Christmas tree sale. Prices listed. Cash only. Volunteers loading trucks. And standing proudly in the center was Karen, the HOA president, smiling like she owned it all. Evan's chest tightened. No notice. No agreement. No permission. She had crossed a line. When he calmly asked what was happening, Karen waved him off and claimed the trees were community assets. She insisted the HOA had authority over unused land and accused him of trying to steal from neighbors. Evan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply watched as more trees disappeared, receipts exchanged, and money changed hands. Karen believed this was her moment of control. She didn't realize this was the moment everything began to unravel. As night fell, Evan made one quiet phone call that would turn a festive weekend into a legal nightmare for the HOA, and the truth was about to surface in a way no one could ignore. By the next morning, the pine farm looked wounded, like something precious had been taken without consent. What Karen saw as profit, Evan saw as evidence. Evan returned early, camera in hand, documenting every stump, every sign, every transaction still happening. Karen was louder now, more confident, telling neighbors the HOA had handled the paperwork. She even bragged about how much money they'd raised overnight. Evan said nothing. He remembered the deed his father handed him years ago, the one that clearly marked boundaries, ownership, and mineral rights. This wasn't shared land. This wasn't HOA-controlled property. This was a registered pine farm under his name, filed with the county and protected by agricultural law. As Karen continued selling, Evan contacted the county assessor, the forestry office, and a local attorney. Each call confirmed the same thing. The HOA had no claim. No authority. No defense. When an officer stopped by to observe the crowd, Karen proudly explained her version of the story. The officer listened quietly, then asked for documentation. Karen laughed and said she didn't have it on her, but it existed. Evan stood nearby, calm, holding a folder. Inside were permits, surveys, tax records, and decades of ownership history. The officer's expression changed as he reviewed them. Karen's smile faded, just slightly. The officer informed her the sale needed to stop immediately until ownership was verified. Karen protested, accusing Evan of intimidation. But the officer shut it down politely. As neighbors watched, the tree sale froze in place. No more cash. No more trucks. No more authority. Karen had pushed too far, and for the first time, doubt crept into her voice. Evan knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of accountability, and the real consequences were coming faster than anyone expected. Karen didn't back down. She doubled down, and that decision would cost her everything. That afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting, spinning the story in her favor. She claimed Evan was lying, that the farm had been abandoned, and that the HOA was acting in the community's best interest. Some residents believed her. Others stayed quiet, uneasy. Evan arrived with his attorney, calm and prepared. When Karen tried to deny him the floor, the attorney stepped forward and requested the meeting be recorded. That alone shifted the room. Evan presented the documents slowly, clearly, explaining how the pine farm wasn't just land, it was a licensed agricultural operation. Selling trees without consent wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. Karen interrupted repeatedly, insisting the HOA bylaws gave her power. The attorney asked her to point out where. She couldn't. Silence filled the room. Then came the numbers. The total sales. The cash collected. The missing inventory. The attorney explained that unauthorized sales, misuse of HOA authority, and handling unreported cash could trigger serious legal consequences. Faces went pale. Karen's confidence cracked. She accused Evan of trying to ruin Christmas. Evan finally spoke. He said Christmas wasn't about control or money. It was about respect. And respect had been ignored. By the time the meeting ended, neighbors were whispering, some angry, some embarrassed. Karen left early, refusing questions. Evan knew the HOA board would soon realize the danger they were in. The story was no longer about trees. It was about abuse of power. And the law was already catching up, faster than Karen could escape it. 2 days later, official letters arrived. That's when panic replaced arrogance. The HOA board received notices from the county demanding explanations for unauthorized agricultural sales. Tax authorities requested income records. The forestry department opened an investigation into illegal harvesting. Karen stopped answering calls. She claimed stress. But the damage was already done. Evan received apologies from neighbors who had bought trees unknowingly. Some even offered to testify. When investigators visited the property, Evan cooperated fully, providing footage, timestamps, and sales estimates. Karen was summoned to explain where the money went. She insisted it was for community use, but couldn't produce receipts or deposits. Board members began distancing themselves, stating they acted under her direction. The holiday lights still glowed across the neighborhood, but the mood had shifted. What was meant to be festive had turned into a cautionary tale. Evan walked his land at sunset, touching the rough bark of trees that remained. He didn't feel anger. He felt resolve. The pine farm had been in his family for generations, and he wasn't going to let entitlement erase that history. News spread locally, and whispers of legal action became certainty. Karen's position as HOA president was no longer secure. She had underestimated one quiet landowner. And now, the truth was standing tall, just like the trees she thought she could take without consequence. The final board meeting felt different. This time, Karen wasn't in control. Under pressure from residents and legal counsel, the HOA convened publicly. Karen arrived late, tense, avoiding eye contact. The board announced the investigation findings. Unauthorized sales confirmed. Funds unaccounted for. Abuse of authority documented. A vote was called. Karen was removed as president immediately. The room was silent as the decision settled in. Evan wasn't celebrating. He was listening. The board issued a formal apology and agreed to full restitution. Legal fees. Lost inventory. Public acknowledgement. Karen attempted to speak, but the board declined. Outside, neighbors thanked Evan for standing firm. Some admitted they'd been afraid to question her before. Evan said nothing dramatic. He simply nodded. Accountability didn't need speeches. As winter deepened, the pine farm stood peaceful again. The HOA learned a lesson it wouldn't forget. Authority doesn't replace ownership. Confidence doesn't replace truth. And silence doesn't mean weakness. Evan drove home knowing the story would travel far beyond the neighborhood. Not because of revenge, but because standing your ground can change everything. The Christmas season returned to what it should have been: quiet, respectful, and honest. Weeks later, the investigation concluded, and the consequences became official. Karen faced fines, repayment orders, and permanent removal from HOA leadership. The money collected was returned to buyers, and the HOA implemented strict transparency rules. Evan's pine farm received formal protection status, preventing future disputes. Reporters called, but Evan declined interviews. He didn't want attention. He wanted peace. Neighbors treated him differently now, not with fear, but respect. Children waved as he passed. Families bought trees properly the following year, with permits and gratitude. The land felt alive again. Evan reflected on how close everything came to being lost, not through force, but through entitlement. Karen never apologized publicly. But she moved away quietly, her authority gone. Evan understood something important. Power only lasts when no one challenges it. The moment truth speaks, false control collapses. His father's words echoed in his mind. Land remembers who protects it. Evan smiled, knowing he had done just that. And the story of the stolen Christmas trees became a reminder heard far beyond one HOA, a reminder that ownership, patience, and courage always outlast arrogance. The pine trees still stood tall when the next winter arrived, and so did the lesson this neighborhood would never forget. Evan watched families choose trees with laughter instead of tension. Permits were posted clearly. Payments were recorded properly. The HOA stayed silent, cautious, respectful. No one questioned boundaries anymore. What began as a power grab ended as a story of accountability. Karen had believed authority meant ownership. She learned too late that confidence without truth collapses fast. Evan never sought revenge. He simply stood on what was his and let the facts speak. And they spoke loudly enough to change everything. The neighborhood healed. Trust returned slowly. And the Pine Farm remained, rooted in history, protected by law, and respected by all, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.